Today we begin our deep dive into the incredible story of a man whose name is forever etched in the annals of Soviet military might, Alexei Antonovich Grechko. This is the story of a humble young man destined to rise from a simple Red Army soldier to Marshal of the Soviet Union and Minister of Defense. His life is a chronicle of resilience, strategic genius, and unparalleled service to the motherland. We will trace how his unique military experience, forged in the fires of the battle for the Caucasus, became the foundation for the development and modernization of the Soviet armed forces in the post-war years. What kind of person was he, and how did his decisions determine the fates of millions? All this and much more in our video today. Our hero, Alexei Antonovich Grechko, was born in 1903 in the small village of Golodyevka, located on the Don. This was the land of Cossacks, free and hard-working people, where every man from a young age learned the value of land and a free life. The Grechko family was large. Alexei grew up surrounded by 13 other brothers and sisters, which, in itself, hardened his character and taught mutual assistance. His father, Anton Vasilyevich, worked at a factory and also engaged in farming, instilling in his children respect for labor and discipline. His mother, Olga Karpovna, was a true keeper of the hearth, a wise and strong woman whose care and love shaped qualities such as resilience and a sense of responsibility in Alexei. The atmosphere in the family was filled with respect for elders, folk traditions, and, of course, love for the motherland. It was here, in the steppes of the Don, surrounded by a large and friendly family, that the foundations of the character were laid, which later led Alexei Grechko to the top of the military hierarchy. The future marshal witnessed the turbulent events of the early 20th century. He saw how Russia changed, how the revolution and civil war redrew the map of his native country. These events undoubtedly left a deep mark on the mind of young Alexei, shaping his worldview and beliefs. In 1919, at the age of 16, Alexei Grechko made a decision that determined his entire future destiny. He voluntarily joined the ranks of the Red Army. This was not just a career choice, it was a choice of a path that led him through the crucible of the Civil War, through years of study and service to the heights of military mastery. His first steps in the army were modest. He was an ordinary soldier, but even then his natural leadership qualities, sharp mind, and extraordinary determination were evident. A little later, in 1926, he graduated from the Crimean Cavalry School, which became an important stage in his military education. And this was just the beginning. New challenges, new knowledge, and new victories awaited him, which would forever inscribe his name in history. After graduating from the Crimean Cavalry School in 1926, a new chapter began in Alexei Grechko's military biography. This was a time when the young Red Army was actively forming and needed competent, proactive commanders. Grechko, possessing not only theoretical knowledge, but also invaluable experience from the Civil War, quickly rose through the ranks. He was distinguished by his attention to detail, ability to make quick and balanced decisions, and skill in finding common ground with subordinates. He was not a desk officer, preferring to be in the thick of events, personally studying the situation and training his soldiers. In those years, he commanded various cavalry units, from a platoon to a regiment, honing his skills and studying the intricacies of tactics. Cavalry, despite the emergence of tanks, still remained an important component of the army, especially in vast spaces and underdeveloped road networks. Grechko understood this and paid great attention to the maneuverability, speed, and suddenness of his unit's actions. He constantly improved his knowledge, never ceasing to learn. In 1936, he entered the Frunze Military Academy. one of the most prestigious military educational institutions of that time. Training at the academy gave him not only deep theoretical knowledge in strategy and operational art, but also allowed him to form a broad outlook necessary for a military leader of such a level. He studied the history of wars, analyzed the tactics of great commanders, participated in military games and discussions where he honed his strategic thinking. It was here, within the walls of the academy, that the unique command style was formed that would later bring him fame. Grechko was a proponent of active actions, bold maneuvers, and unconventional decisions. He believed in the initiative of commanders on the ground and was able to delegate authority, trusting his subordinates. After graduating from the academy in 1938, Alexei Grechko was appointed Chief of Staff of the Special Cavalry Brigade. This was a significant promotion, testifying to the high trust of the command. In this position, he participated in the liberation campaign of the Red Army in western Ukraine in 1939. This experience was his first serious test as a staff officer, where not only combat skills but also the ability to coordinate the actions of large military formations were required. Then followed events that finally shaped him as a combat commander. In 1940, during the Soviet-Finnish War, Grechko commanded a cavalry corps. The Winter War, as it was also called, was a severe test for the Red Army. Harsh frosts, forested terrain, stubborn enemy resistance, all this demanded maximum dedication from commanders. Grechko successfully coped with the tasks, showing extraordinary endurance and organizational skills. His units operated effectively despite the difficult conditions. He was not afraid to take responsibility and make risky but justified decisions. This combat experience, gained in real war conditions, became invaluable for the future marshal. He learned to quickly assess the situation, anticipate enemy actions, and promptly respond to changing conditions. All these years, filled with study and service, shaped Alexei Grechko as an outstanding military leader, ready for the most serious trials. He was ready for the impending global upheavals that were already looming on the horizon. June 22, 1941. This day forever divided the lives of millions of Soviet people into before and after. For Colonel Alexei Grechko, commander of the 34th Cavalry Division, it marked the beginning of the most terrible ordeal. The war erupted suddenly, without warning, like a bolt from the blue. Grechko's division was located in the area of Bila Tserkva in Ukraine, and was one of the first to bear the brunt of German tank wedges. In those first mortally dangerous days, when the Red Army had not yet recovered from the shock and was unable to organize a full-fledged defense, the task of commanders was not only to contain the enemy, but also to preserve the combat readiness of their units. Retreat was not just a maneuver, it became a harsh reality, demanding incredible courage and strategic thinking. Grechko realized that his division, armed mainly with light firearms and sabers, could not equally oppose the motorized formations of the Wehrmacht. His main goal was not to let the enemy encircle and destroy his units, maximally delaying their advance and inflicting tangible blows. Under his command, the division fought the heaviest defensive battles, retreating eastward, meter by meter, clinging to every line. This was a retreat filled with losses, bitterness, and heroism. Grechko's fighters, despite the enemy's superiority in equipment and numbers, fought desperately. They carried out daring raids into the enemy's rear, destroying their columns, disrupting communications. Each such blow, each delay of the Germans, gave precious time for the evacuation of civilians and the transfer of reinforcements. Grechko demonstrated an amazing ability to maintain composure in the most critical situations. He personally visited positions, spoke with soldiers, and boosted their morale. His decisions were quick and accurate, based on a deep understanding of tactics and intuition. He knew how to find unexpected ways out of seemingly hopeless situations. Thus, in one of the most difficult situations, when the division was threatened with encirclement, Grechko made a bold decision to break through swamps considered impassable for cavalry. This maneuver allowed him to save a significant part of the personnel and equipment, as well as suddenly attack the enemy from the flank, inflicting serious damage. Such actions required not only military talent, but also enormous faith in his subordinates, their endurance and loyalty. He did not just command, he led by example, being a model of steadfastness and courage. In the autumn of 1941, Colonel Grechko was appointed commander of the 5th Cavalry Corps. This was a promotion, but also a new, even more complex task. The Corps was part of the Southern Front and was to participate in the famous Rostov offensive operation. This operation became one of the first successful offensive operations of the Red Army at the beginning of the war, showing that the Wehrmacht was not invincible. Under Grechko's command, the 5th Cavalry Corps played a key role in the liberation of Rostov-on-Don. His cavalrymen, acting in close cooperation with other branches of service, broke through enemy defenses, outflanked them, and crushed their rear. In the conditions of the offensive operation, Grechko again proved himself to be a talented strategist and tactician, capable of quickly making decisions and effectively using available resources. He skillfully used the speed and maneuverability of the cavalry to disorganize enemy troops, spreading panic in their ranks. This success became an important stage in his military career and strengthened his reputation as one of the most promising young generals of the Red Army. He showed that even with enemy superiority, with competent command and the heroic steadfastness of the soldiers, victories could be achieved. New battles, new trials awaited him, but the first months of the war hardened his character and gave him invaluable experience, which would later form the basis of his military greatness. The year 1942 arrived. For Alexei Grechko, who had already established himself as a talented and decisive commander, this year brought a new, even more responsible appointment. He was sent to the Caucasus, to the very heart of a strategically important region, becoming the commander of the 12th Army. This was not just another sector of the front, it was the key to the oil fields of Baku, to the Black Sea coast, to the southern borders of the Soviet Union. Hitler saw in the Caucasus not only a source of resources, but also a symbol that could undermine the spirit of resistance. Grechko's appointment to the Caucasian front was no accident. His experience in conducting combat operations in difficult conditions, his ability to organize defense and inspire soldiers to fight, were exactly what was needed in this critical situation. He faced the task not just of containing the enemy, but of turning mountain passes and gorges into an impregnable fortress. The Caucasian campaign was unique. It was a war in the mountains, where every slope, every stone could become a firing point or a shelter. Here, conventional tactical schemes did not work. New approaches, non-standard solutions were required. Grechko understood this better than anyone. He actively used the experience of local residents, who knew the mountains like the back of their hand. Under his leadership, engineers created a complex system of defensive structures, utilizing the natural terrain. Every pass, every valley was turned into a mini fortress. Roads were mined, barricades were built, traps were set. Grechko paid enormous attention to training soldiers for mountain warfare. Ordinary infantrymen learned mountaineering, orientation, and camouflage in the rocks. Special attention was paid to mountain riflemen and sappers who were to operate detached from the main forces, conducting sabotage operations and setting ambushes. An important part of Grechko's strategy was interaction with the local population. In the conditions of mountain warfare, without the support of local residents, it would have been impossible to provide the army with food, orient themselves on the terrain, or obtain intelligence data. Grechko personally met with representatives of mountain peoples, explained to them the importance of defending the Caucasus, involved them in the construction of defensive structures, and in working in the rear. His approach was based on respect and trust, and this bore fruit. Local residents became reliable assistants to the Red Army, guides, scouts, and suppliers. They shared their knowledge of little-known trails, weather conditions, and water and food supplies. This support was invaluable. The commander of the 12th Army also actively used aviation for reconnaissance and support of ground troops. In mountainous terrain where visibility is limited and movement on the ground is difficult, aerial reconnaissance provided invaluable information about enemy movements. Aviation also struck concentrations of enemy troops, destroying their communications. Grechko understood that in mountain warfare, every soldier was important. He constantly monitored the morale of the soldiers and their provisions. He knew that in the mountains, cut off from main supply bases, soldiers particularly needed support. His army stood to the death, holding every inch of ground, preventing the enemy from breaking through to vital objectives. This was the battle for the Caucasus, and Grechko was one of those who accepted this challenge. Now that the defense of the Caucasus was more or less established, a turning point arrived. The enemy, despite fierce resistance, continued to push towards the oil fields. It seemed that every inch of land was soaked in blood. But Alexei Grechko, commander of the 56th Army, was not going to give up. He understood that passive defense was merely a postponement of defeat. It was time to act decisively, to seize the initiative. It was here, in the crucible of the Battle of the Caucasus, that his tactical genius and ability to find unconventional solutions manifested themselves. The main task was not only to stop the enemy's advance, but also to push them back, to liberate the captured territories. This required not just courage, but also meticulous calculation, the ability to see several steps ahead. Grechko concentrated his efforts on counterattacks, which seemed impossible in the conditions of mountain warfare. He actively used mountain rifle units, trained to operate in difficult terrain, bypassing enemy positions from the flanks and rear. These units, like ghosts, appeared where they were least expected, delivering sudden blows and sowing panic in the enemy's ranks. One of the key operations developed under his leadership was the offensive on Tuapse. This was a strategically important port on the Black Sea coast, the loss of which could have catastrophic consequences. German troops, confident in the impregnability of their positions, were caught off guard. Grechko applied tactics of deep flanking maneuvers using little-known mountain trails. His troops, making multi-day marches through rugged terrain, appeared in the enemy's rear, disrupting their communications and creating a threat of encirclement. This forced the Germans to retreat, leaving behind well-fortified positions. During these operations, Grechko proved himself a master of camouflage and disinformation. He skillfully concealed the true directions of the main thrusts, misleading the enemy about his intentions. Thanks to this, his troops managed to achieve the effect of surprise, which was extremely important in conditions where the enemy had numerical superiority in equipment. Another innovative approach was the widespread use of artillery in mountainous conditions. This was a difficult task, but Grechko managed to organize effective artillery support for the advancing troops. Artillerymen, literally dragging their guns by hand up mountain slopes, occupied commanding heights from which they could conduct aimed fire on enemy positions. He also actively applied the tactic of a quote zero, where artillery fire moved ahead of the advancing infantry, suppressing enemy firing points and clearing the way. This significantly reduced casualties among personnel and accelerated the pace of the offensive. Interaction with aviation also reached a new level. Aircraft not only conducted reconnaissance and struck enemy concentrations, but also delivered cargo and evacuated the wounded to remote areas. Grechko understood that in the mountains, where roads were often under enemy fire, an air bridge was vital. As a result of these bold and decisive actions, the 56th Army under Grechko's command not only stopped the enemy's advance, but also launched a counteroffensive, liberating significant territories. The Battle of the Caucasus became a turning point not only for this region, but also for the entire course of the Great Patriotic War. It was a victory not only of weapons but also of spirit, strategic thinking, and an unparalleled will to win. Grechko proved that even in the most difficult conditions, with competent command and the heroic steadfastness of soldiers, even the strongest enemy can be broken. His experience and tactical innovations, applied in mountain warfare, later formed the basis of many military textbooks and were studied in academies. He did not just command an army. He created new tactics adapted to the unique conditions of the Caucasus. His name became a symbol of resilience and determination, and his actions in the Caucasus are forever inscribed in history as an example of outstanding military leadership. Now that the defense of the Caucasus was more or less established, a turning point arrived. The enemy, despite fierce resistance, continued to push towards the oil fields. It seemed that every inch of land was soaked in blood. But Alexei Grechko, commander of the 56th Army, had no intention of surrendering. He understood that passive defense was merely a postponement of defeat. It was time to act decisively, to seize the initiative. It was here, in the crucible of the Battle of the Caucasus, that his tactical genius and ability for unconventional solutions manifested. The main task was not only to stop the enemy's advance, but also to push them back, to liberate the captured territories. This required not just courage, but also subtle calculation, the ability to see several steps ahead. Grechko focused his efforts on counterattacks, which seemed impossible in the conditions of mountain warfare. He actively utilized mountain rifle units trained to operate in difficult terrain to outflank and bypass enemy positions. These units, like ghosts, appeared where they were least expected, delivering sudden blows and sowing panic in the enemy's ranks. One of the key operations developed under his leadership was the offensive on Tuapse. This was a strategically important port on the Black Sea coast, the loss of which could have catastrophic consequences. German troops, confident in the impregnability of their positions, were caught by surprise. Grechko employed tactics of deep encirclement, using little-known mountain trails. His troops, making multi-day marches across rugged terrain, appeared in the enemy's rear, disrupting their communications and creating a threat of encirclement. This forced the Germans to retreat, leaving behind well-fortified positions. During these operations, Grechko proved himself a master of camouflage and disinformation. He skillfully concealed the true directions of the main attacks, misleading the enemy about his intentions. Thanks to this, his troops managed to achieve the effect of surprise, which was extremely important in conditions where the enemy had numerical superiority in equipment. Another innovative approach was the widespread use of artillery in mountainous conditions. This was a difficult task, but Grechko managed to organize effective artillery support for the advancing troops. Artillerymen, literally dragging guns by hand up mountain slopes, occupied dominant heights from where they could conduct aimed fire at enemy positions. He also actively applied the tactic of a, quote, zero, where artillery fire moved ahead of advancing infantry, suppressing enemy firing points and clearing the way. This significantly reduced losses among personnel and accelerated the pace of the offensive. Interaction with aviation also reached a new level. Aircraft not only conducted reconnaissance and struck enemy concentrations, but also delivered cargo and evacuated the wounded to hard-to-reach areas. Grechko understood that in the mountains, where roads were often under enemy fire, an air bridge was vital. As a result of these bold and decisive actions, the 56th Army under Grechko's command not only stopped the enemy's advance, but also launched a counteroffensive, liberating significant territories. The Battle of the Caucasus became a turning point not only for this region, but also for the entire course of the Great Patriotic War. It was a victory not only of weapons but also of spirit, strategic thinking, and an unparalleled will to win. Grechko proved that even in the most difficult conditions, with competent command and the heroic resilience of soldiers, the strongest enemy can be broken. His experience and tactical innovations, applied in mountain warfare, subsequently formed the basis of many military textbooks and were studied in academies. He did not just command an army, he created new tactics adapted to the unique conditions of the Caucasus. His name became a symbol of steadfastness and determination, and his actions in the Caucasus are forever inscribed in history as an example of outstanding military leadership. By the end of 1943, the situation on the Soviet-German front had changed radically. The Red Army had seized the strategic initiative, and the former commander of the 56th Army, now Lieutenant General Alexei Grechko, found himself at the forefront of offensive operations. His troops, hardened in the battles for the Caucasus, were now advancing, liberating their homeland and moving further west towards the borders of Europe. This was a period when each day brought news of new victories, but each victory came at the cost of immense effort and sacrifice. Grechko, as always, was on the front line, personally overseeing the course of operations. His ability to quickly assess the situation and make bold decisions allowed him to achieve success even in the most difficult conditions. He understood that the war was entering a new phase, where speed and maneuver played a decisive role. His army participated in the liberation of right bank Ukraine, the forcing of the Dnieper, and then in the Jassy-Kishinev operation, which became one of the most successful strategic operations of the Red Army. In these operations, Grechko demonstrated not only his military leadership, but also outstanding organizational skills. He skillfully coordinated the actions of various branches of the armed forces: infantry, artillery, tanks, aviation, creating powerful strike forces capable of breaking through deeply echeloned enemy defenses. His troops did not just advance, they crushed the enemy, giving him no chance to recover. One of the key features of Grechko's military leadership style was his ability to effectively interact with allies. In the conditions of college warfare, when armies of different countries operated on the same front, this was extremely important. Grechko perfectly understood that victory over the common enemy was possible only through close cooperation. Thus, during the liberation of Romania and Hungary, his troops had to act hand in hand with units of the Romanian and Bulgarian armies. Grechko established personal contacts with their commanders, held joint staff meetings, and coordinated plans for offense and supply. He was able to find common ground, overcoming language and cultural barriers, achieving mutual understanding and trust. His diplomatic abilities, along with his military talent, played an important role in the success of these operations. He did not just give orders, he built relationships based on mutual respect and a common goal. By the beginning of 1945, troops under Grechko's command were already in Czechoslovakia, participating in the liberation of that country. The culmination of his combat path was the Prague Offensive, one of the last major operations of the Great Patriotic War. The troops of the First Ukrainian Front, which included his army, rapidly moved towards Prague to prevent the destruction of the city by retreating German units and to aid the insurgent residents. It was a race against time, and Grechko once again showed his determination and ability to take unconventional actions. His troops carried out many kilometer marches, overcoming enemy resistance and mountain passes to come to the rescue as quickly as possible. On May 8, 1945, when Victory Day was already being celebrated in Europe, fierce battles were still raging in Prague. But thanks to the rapid offensive of Soviet troops, including Grechko's army, the city was liberated and its inhabitants were saved from inevitable massacre. Alexei Grechko's contribution to the defeat of Nazism was enormous. He went through the entire war, from its first days to the victorious end, commanding armies in the most difficult and decisive battles. His military leadership, strategic thinking, and ability to interact with allies were important factors in achieving the great victory. He was one of those who forged the victory, step by step liberating Europe from the fascist yoke, and whose name will forever remain in history as a symbol of courage and valor. The long-awaited Victory Day finally arrived. The last salvos died down, the guns fell silent. But for Alexei Grechko, as for thousands of other military commanders, the war did not end with the signing of the Act of Surrender. An equally difficult task lay ahead: the restoration of the country and its armed forces. The first post-war years became a time of colossal changes. The world, having just survived the bloodiest war in history, faced new challenges. The era of the Cold War was beginning, and yesterday's allies were turning into potential adversaries. In these circumstances, Grechko, already a colonel general, continued his service in responsible positions. His invaluable combat experience, gained in the crucible of the Great Patriotic War, became the foundation for the formation of a new military strategy. He understood that the army that defeated Nazism needed deep modernization and adaptation to new realities. The primary task was the demobilization of millions of soldiers and officers, their return to peaceful life, while maintaining the combat effectiveness of the remaining units. Grechko actively participated in the development of plans to reduce the army, trying to preserve the maximum number of career officers and the most experienced fighters. He paid attention not only to technical equipment, but also to the morale of military personnel, their training and preparation for new types of weapons. One of Grechko's main concerns was the rearmament of the army. Yesterday's T-34 tanks and Yak aircraft, although they proved their effectiveness in the war, no longer met the requirements of the new era. The nuclear age loomed on the horizon, and this required fundamentally different approaches to defense. Grechko was one of those who actively advocated for the development of missile forces, for the creation of a powerful navy and modern aviation. He perfectly understood that future wars would be different from those in the past and demanded from his subordinates a constant search for new solutions and technologies. He initiated the creation of new military educational institutions and research centers, where advanced models of weapons and military equipment were developed. Grechko saw the future of the Soviet armed forces as a high-tech, mobile, and well-trained army, capable of effectively countering any threat. He was a proponent of preventive measures, believing that the best defense is preparedness for attack. His vision included not only the buildup of military power, but also the development of military science, the training of highly qualified personnel capable of thinking strategically and making decisions in a rapidly changing environment. He actively promoted ideas about the need to create a unified air defense system, about the development of long-range aviation, and a submarine fleet capable of striking the enemy at long distances. Grechko also paid attention to ideological work, understanding that in the conditions of the Cold War, the morale of the army was no less important than its technical equipment. He held meetings with personnel, explaining to them the geopolitical situation, the importance of their service for the defense of the motherland. His authority, earned on the battlefields, was indisputable, and his words resonated in the hearts of soldiers and officers. Grechko's activities in the first post-war years laid the foundation for the subsequent modernization of the Soviet armed forces. He was able to adapt military strategy to new realities, anticipating the challenges of the future and preparing the army for them. His role in the restoration and development of the army was invaluable, and it was in these years that the image of the future Minister of Defense was formed, capable of leading the armed forces of a great power in the most difficult geopolitical situation. The post-war years demanded from yesterday's commanders not only the ability to wage war, but also the talent to govern. For Alexei Grechko, whose organizational abilities shone brightly already on the fronts of the Great Patriotic War, the time had come for new challenges. His appointment as commander of the troops of the Kiev Military District in 1945 was a logical continuation of his career. Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, was not just one of the largest military districts, it was a strategically important region requiring special attention. Here, on the western borders of the country, in the conditions of the escalating Cold War, a new defensive shield was being formed. Grechko understood the full responsibility placed upon him. He began his work with his characteristic energy. The primary task was to restore the combat readiness of units returning from the front. Many units were exhausted by battles, requiring replenishment and rearmament. Grechko personally supervised the demobilization process, ensuring that veterans received well-deserved rest and new professions, while the army did not lose its best personnel. Under his leadership, the Kiev Military District became a leading experimental ground for introducing new weapon systems and military equipment. Grechko was a proponent of technical progress and actively promoted ideas of mechanization and automation in the army. He organized large-scale exercises during which new tactical methods were practiced, and the capabilities of tanks, artillery, and aviation in modern combat conditions were tested. Grechko paid special attention to the training of command personnel. He understood that the future of the army depended on the qualifications of officers. With his active participation, new advanced training courses were created, where not only tactics and strategy were studied, but also the basics of nuclear physics, rocket technology, and radio electronics. He demanded from his officers not only deep knowledge, but also a broad outlook, the ability to think outside the box, and make decisions in conditions of uncertainty. In 1953, Grechko was appointed commander-in-chief of the group of Soviet forces in Germany. This was an even more responsible appointment, as Germany became the epicenter of the confrontation between two world systems. In conditions of escalating tension and the threat of nuclear war, it was here, on the front line of the Cold War, that a military leader with an iron will and strategic thinking was required. But we will talk about this in the next part. In 1953, when the world was just beginning to recover after a terrible war, Alexei Grechko found himself in a new, strategically important position. He was appointed commander-in-chief of the group of Soviet forces in Germany, on the front line of the Cold War, in the very heart of a divided Europe. This was not just a military post. It was a mission to ensure peace and stability amidst the growing confrontation between two world systems. Germany, yesterday's enemy, had turned into a key chessboard on which the game for the continent's future was being played out. The Soviet Union and NATO countries were increasing their military presence, and any incautious move could lead to catastrophe. Grechko perfectly understood the complexity and responsibility of the situation. His task was not only to maintain high combat readiness of the troops, but also to prevent any provocations, to ensure the security of Soviet citizens and allies. He arrived in Germany with vast experience, tempered in the fire of the Great Patriotic War. His ability to make quick and balanced decisions, his strategic thinking, and his capacity for unconventional actions were more in demand than ever. Under his leadership, the group of Soviet forces in Germany became a powerful and well-oiled mechanism. He paid enormous attention to combat training, conducting large-scale exercises that practiced actions in conditions of nuclear war, the interaction of various branches of service, and methods of countering the latest NATO weaponry. Grechko was a proponent of active defense, but at the same time, he always emphasized the need for readiness for preventive actions in case of aggression. He understood that in conditions of nuclear confrontation, any mistake could be fatal, and he demanded maximum vigilance and professionalism from his subordinates. He personally controlled the process of modernizing armaments, introducing the latest models of tanks, artillery, aviation, and missile systems. Under his leadership, the group of Soviet forces in Germany became one of the most equipped and combat-ready armies in the world. Grechko actively developed the air defense system, creating a multi-layered defense against possible air attacks. He also paid attention to infrastructure development, the construction of new military towns, training grounds, and airfields. An important aspect of his activity was maintaining the high morale of military personnel. He regularly met with officers and soldiers, explaining to them the geopolitical situation, the importance of their service in ensuring peace and security. His authority, earned on the battlefields, was indisputable, and his words resonated in the hearts of the fighters. Grechko also played an important role in diplomatic processes related to Germany. He participated in negotiations, defending the interests of the Soviet Union, and contributed to the de-escalation of tension in the conditions of the Cold War. His tenure as commander-in-chief of the group of Soviet forces in Germany became a period of strengthening the country's defense capability and ensuring strategic parity with the Western Bloc. He was able to create a powerful shield capable of deterring any aggression and guaranteeing security in Europe. It was here, on the front line of confrontation, that Grechko finally formed as a statesman capable of making decisions that influenced the fates of millions. After 7 years commanding the group of Soviet forces in Germany, in 1960, Alexei Grechko returned to Moscow to assume a new, even more responsible post, First Deputy Minister of Defense of the USSR. This was not just a promotion, it was a recognition of his outstanding achievements, strategic mind, and organizational talent. In this position, Grechko became one of the key architects of the Soviet Union's military policy during its period of maximum development and confrontation with the West. His time as Deputy Minister of Defense coincided with one of the most tense stages of the Cold War: the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Crisis, and the arms race. The world balanced on the brink of nuclear catastrophe, and every decision, every action of military leaders held immense significance. Grechko was not a desk man. He perfectly understood that effective leadership required delving deeply into the essence of problems, staying abreast of all innovations and trends. His workday was scheduled to the minute, meetings with top command staff, encounters with designers and scientists, inspection trips to military units and training grounds. He actively participated in developing a new military doctrine that had to account for the realities of nuclear confrontation. He was a proponent of creating a powerful nuclear missile shield capable of guaranteeing the country's security against any aggression. Under his leadership, strategic missile forces, the nuclear-armed submarine fleet, and long-range aviation actively developed. Grechko paid enormous attention not only to the development of offensive weapons, but also to strengthening air and missile defense. He understood that in the event of a possible nuclear conflict, the country's survival would depend on its ability to repel the enemy's first strike. He initiated the creation of new air defense systems that could intercept ballistic missiles and bombers. His influence on key decisions in the military sphere was immense. He was one of those who shaped the strategy of deterrence that prevented a direct military clash between the USSR and the USA. Grechko actively advocated for strengthening the Warsaw Pact, seeing it not only as a military alliance, but also as a tool for maintaining stability in Eastern Europe. He held numerous meetings with the defense ministers of the member countries, coordinating joint exercises and defense plans. One of his initiatives was the creation of a unified command and control system for Warsaw Pact troops, which significantly increased their combat readiness and operational efficiency. He also paid great attention to the development of military technical cooperation with friendly countries, supplying them with the latest weapons and training their military specialists. Grechko was convinced that a strong and modern army was the guarantor of peace. He constantly demanded from his subordinates the improvement of combat training, the introduction of new training methods, and the enhancement of officer qualifications. He personally oversaw large-scale military exercises that practiced actions in conditions of nuclear weapon use, amphibious operations, and the interaction of various branches of service. During his time as Deputy Minister of Defense, a large-scale reorganization of the armed forces was carried out, aimed at their optimization and increased effectiveness. New types and branches of troops were created, the command system was improved, and the latest technologies were introduced. He was the person who was not afraid to take responsibility for the most complex decisions that could affect the fates of millions. His strategic thinking, deep knowledge, and colossal experience made him indispensable in the country's highest military leadership. He was not just a military man, he was a statesman who understood that the country's defense capability was not only tanks and missiles, but also a strong economy, developed science, and a high morale of the people. It was in this position that Alexei Grechko laid the foundations of what later became the might of the Soviet armed forces. He prepared the ground for his future appointment, which would change the face of the Soviet army forever. Finally, in 1967, what was inevitable and a logical continuation of Alexei Grechko's brilliant career occurred. He was appointed to the country's highest military post, Minister of Defense of the USSR. This appointment became a symbol of a new era in the development of the Soviet armed forces, an era of deep modernization and technological destruction, which was to be led by a man who had risen from a private to a marshal of the Soviet Union. Grechko took over the Ministry of Defense at a time when the Cold War had reached its peak. The arms race was in full swing, and military confrontation with the West demanded constant improvement of its army and navy from the Soviet Union. Grechko, more than anyone else, understood that the future was not about quantity, but about quality, technological superiority, and strategic thinking. His program for modernizing the Soviet Army and Navy was ambitious and comprehensive. He set the task not just to catch up, but to surpass a potential adversary in all key areas. The main directions of his activity were the development of a missile and nuclear shield, the strengthening of air and missile defense, the creation of a powerful ocean-going navy, and the improvement of ground forces. Grechko was convinced that strategic missile forces were the foundation of the country's security. Under his leadership, new intercontinental ballistic missile systems, capable of overcoming any missile defense systems, were actively developed and adopted. He paid attention not only to launchers, but also to control systems, communications, and intelligence, creating a unified, reliable, and highly effective complex. At the same time, Grechko understood that without reliable protection against a possible attack, even the most powerful nuclear shield is powerless. Therefore, he initiated a large-scale program to strengthen air and missile defense. New generations of anti-aircraft missile systems were created, capable of intercepting targets at high altitudes and ranges. He actively supported the development and implementation of early warning systems for missile attacks, which would allow for precious minutes to be gained for taking retaliatory measures. Another priority for Grechko was the creation of a powerful ocean-going navy. Believing that the future of naval battles lay with submarines, he paid special attention to the construction of nuclear submarines equipped with ballistic and cruise missiles. Under his leadership, the Soviet fleet entered the world ocean, becoming a real force capable of projecting the power of the Soviet Union anywhere in the world. He also contributed to the development of the surface fleet, the construction of aircraft-carrying cruisers, which were to provide support for submarines and aviation. Ground forces also did not remain without attention. Grechko actively promoted the ideas of mechanization and automation, equipping the army with the latest tanks, armored personnel carriers, and artillery systems. He paid attention to the development of airborne troops, the creation of highly mobile units capable of operating anywhere in the world. The structural reforms initiated by Grechko were aimed at increasing the efficiency of managing the armed forces. He created new main directorates responsible for prospective developments and the introduction of new technologies. He simplified the command and control system, making it more flexible and operational. Grechko was not just an administrator. He was a forward-thinking strategist. He personally supervised many scientific and design developments, constantly demanding breakthrough solutions from scientists and engineers. He understood that in a technological race, falling behind even by one step could be fatal. His activity as Minister of Defense of the USSR led to the fact that the Soviet armed forces became one of the most powerful and modern armies in the world, capable of effectively resisting any threat and ensuring the security of the Soviet Union in the most complex geopolitical situation. He laid the foundation for the further development of the country's military power, and his legacy will be studied for many years to come. As Minister of Defense, Alexei Grechko became not just the leader of a colossal military machine, but also the chief theoretician and architect of the new Soviet military doctrine. His strategic legacy is not merely a set of directives. It is a deeply thought-out system of views on the nature of future warfare and on the role and place of the armed forces in conditions of nuclear confrontation. He was convinced that in a new era, when the very existence of humanity was at stake, military thought must anticipate events, foresee threats, and find asymmetrical responses. Grechko perfectly understood that the previous war, while providing invaluable experience, could not be a direct guide for future conflicts. He was one of those who actively promoted the idea that the main emphasis should be placed on missile and nuclear weapons as the primary deterrent. His doctrine was based on the concept of guaranteed retaliatory strike, That is, the Soviet Union's ability to inflict unacceptable damage on an aggressor, even in the event of a sudden attack. This required not just the presence of a nuclear arsenal, but also its high combat readiness, survivability, and capability for rapid and massive application. Under his leadership, strategic missile forces were actively developed, mobile launch systems were created, and highly protected silo complexes were built. At the same time, Grechko paid attention to conventional armed forces, believing that they should be capable of conducting combat operations in conditions of nuclear weapon use. His concept envisioned deep offensive operations, rapid breakthrough of enemy defenses, and the encirclement and destruction of their groupings. He insisted on high mobility of troops, their ability to operate autonomously, and effective interaction between different branches of service. An important element of Grechko's doctrine was the strengthening of air and missile defense. He understood that in the event of a possible nuclear war, the country's survival would depend on its ability to repel the first strike. Under his leadership, echeloned air defense systems, capable of intercepting both aircraft and ballistic missiles, were created. He also actively advocated for the development of space-based reconnaissance and communication systems, which were to ensure timely detection of threats and effective troop control. The influence of Grechko's ideas on the development of the armed forces was colossal. It was under his leadership that a new type of army was created, capable of solving tasks of any complexity in conditions of global confrontation. He initiated large-scale military exercises, where actions in a nuclear conflict were practiced, and new tactical methods and strategies were tested. These exercises, such as Dnepr or Zapad, became a school for thousands of officers and generals, shaping their strategic thinking. Grechko's theoretical contribution was not limited to nuclear deterrence alone. He also developed concepts of local wars, believing that the Soviet Union should be ready to participate in conflicts of varying intensity, supporting friendly regimes and protecting its geopolitical interests. He devoted attention to the development of airborne troops, Marines, and special forces capable of operating anywhere in the world. His military doctrine had a significant impact on international security in the second half of the 20th century. It became one of the key factors that ensured strategic parity between the USSR and the USA, preventing a direct military confrontation between the two superpowers. It was thanks to this doctrine that the world was saved from nuclear catastrophe, and the Soviet Union was able to secure its status as one of the two global superpowers. Grechko did not just command the army, he shaped its future, anticipating the challenges of the new century and preparing the armed forces for them. His strategic legacy is not just textbooks on military theory. It is a real force that ensured peace and stability for decades. The legacy of Alexei Grechko is not just a list of positions and awards. It is a deep imprint left by an outstanding military leader and statesman on the history of the Soviet armed forces, and I dare say, on all global military art. His life is a vivid example of how a man who began his journey in a humble Don village, thanks to his talent, perseverance, and selfless service to the motherland, was able to rise to the very heights of power and influence. We have traced his path from a young Red Army soldier to a marshal, from a division commander in the crucible of the Battle of the Caucasus, to a minister of defense who shaped the appearance of the army of a nuclear power. What then is the relevance of Grechko's military strategic thinking for today? First and foremost, in his ability to foresee. He lived and acted in an era of grandiose changes, from cavalry attacks to nuclear missiles. And at each stage, he not only adapted, but actively shaped the future. His bet on technological superiority, on the development of strategic weapons, on the creation of a powerful ocean-going fleet, All of this proved to be prescient and far-sighted. He understood that in the modern world, victory is achieved not only on the battlefield, but also in laboratories, design bureaus, and proving grounds. The lessons of his military art are more relevant than ever. Grechko was a master of maneuver, surprise, and decisiveness. He was not averse to unconventional solutions, whether it was breaking through swamps at the beginning of the war or deep flanking movements in the mountains of the Caucasus. He knew how to use the strengths of his troops and the weaknesses of the enemy, always striving to seize the initiative. But perhaps the main lesson that Alexei Antonovich left us is the lesson of responsibility. He made decisions on which the fates of millions depended, and he always bore full responsibility for them. He was demanding of himself and his subordinates, but always fair. His authority was based not on fear but on respect, on his personal example of courage and professionalism. Grechko did not just lead the army, he shaped its spirit, its values, its readiness for self-sacrifice for a greater cause. He left behind not only powerful armed forces, but also a whole galaxy of talented military leaders educated on his principles. His legacy is not only tanks, missiles, and ships, it is also the inviolable principles of patriotism, military duty, and selfless service to the fatherland. And in this lies his greatness as a military leader and statesman. His memory lives on today, reminding us that even in the darkest times, there are people capable of illuminating the path to victory.